Could NPR and PBS be the next major targets for DOGE? Also, we have brand new data on President Trump and his job performance, as well as the state of the economy. It is a big week for Senate budgets, for special elections, and so much more today on 10 Minute Drill.
Everybody get up, get up.
The story of America is the story of an adventure.
I can hear you. The rest of the world hears you.
We are a nation under God, and I believe God intended for us to be free.
Last week, the CEO of NPR was on Capitol Hill to get grilled by members of the House and Senate about bias at National Public Radio and the role of taxpayers in funding it.
NPR also promoted a book called In Defense of Looting. Do you think that that's an appropriate use of taxpayer dollars?
I'm unfamiliar with that book, sir, and I don't believe that was at my time at NPR.
You tweeted that you read that book, but...
Conservatives have argued that NPR and PBS represent one more way the left has diverted tax dollars from serving the interests of taxpayers towards promoting political agendas that are incredibly divisive. DOGE has had an incredibly effective first few months in changing that conversation and taking a hatchet, a chainsaw, or in many cases a scalpel to those instances of fraud, waste, and abuse that, again, in so many cases are working against the interests of the American people. We talked at length about the Department of Education and the fact that DOGE, both working with the new Department of Education leadership, is getting so much of that funding out of a political process into a way that actually helps students and teachers around the country. There was a really great story last week. Brett Baer sat down with Elon and the DOGE team. I highly recommend watching it. Here's a quick clip of that.
The federal government can't pass an audit. It doesn't know where the money's going. So what we're talking about is just like being able to pass an audit. It will enable taxpayers to know where the money is going and know that their hard-earned tax dollars are being spent well.
As we've talked about here a number of times, it's so valuable for DOGE to go out and make the case for how the cuts they're recommending actually help the American people and take our tax dollars out of things that they would overwhelmingly disagree with. Whether it is with the Department of Education, where our tax dollars are sort of being sliced and diced through this bureaucracy buffet. Instead of going to help teachers and students in schools around the country, they're going to these teachers' unions, special interests that are not actually helping students. Or whether it's NPR, where so much of our money is going to politically active, politically aggressive coverage that we don't always agree with. DOGE is doing incredibly important work here, changing the conversation about how our tax dollars are being spent. Brand new polling shows really interesting numbers about how Americans are feeling about President Trump. CBS poll found that his approval rating is held steady at 50%. However, there are new questions about his economic plans and what they might mean for the cost of goods for Americans. First, 70% of Americans are concerned about their retirement savings. A CBS poll found that 64% found that President Trump is not focused enough on lowering prices, while 31% say the right amount. 55% say he's focused too much on tariffs. And as far as expectations go, Trump policies are making you better off is down 19 points. Worse is up 14%. Now, we all know that President Trump inherited a very tenuous economy from President Biden. There were already warnings of recession and other major red flags coming. However, now that President Trump has put his own mark on the economy with tariffs, that blame is shifting. Now, he does have the ability to go on the road, particularly as these tariffs hit, if he's got positive stories to tell, whether it's about creating manufacturing jobs, onshoring so much of our supply chains, those really important objectives that he's laid out. He'll be able to take that story on the road and convince people that his plan is working. In the near term, there's obviously some doubts about it, but we will see what happens this week, particularly on Wednesday, as those tariffs come into place. Today, major election day, both in Wisconsin and in Florida. Wisconsin has the Supreme Court race we've been talking about, the most expensive state Supreme Court election in American history. Elon Musk was up in Wisconsin over the weekend with Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy making his case.
It's one of those things that may seem like it's obviously important in the state of Wisconsin, but I think it could actually be important for the country as well, and maybe for the world.
Conservatives argue that the election of Brad Schimel has major implications for the future of the state of Wisconsin, particularly 2 congressional seats. Democrat leader Hakeem Jeffries went in an interview and talked about that very specifically.
The lines are broken.
Right.
And as soon as possible, we need to be able to revisit that and have fair lines. The only way for that to be even a significant possibility is if you have an enlightened Supreme Court.
There are two special elections happening today in Florida, the 6th congressional district, to replace Michael Waltz, who joined the Trump administration. The Republican candidate there is Randy Fine. The 1st congressional district also is up to replace former Congressman Matt Gaetz. The Republican candidate is Jimmy Patronis, currently serving as the state's chief financial officer, who's worked alongside Governor DeSantis on a lot of the very important woke agenda items. Over the weekend, President Trump told NBC News that he was increasingly frustrated with Vladimir Putin.
I was disappointed in a certain way, some of the things that were said over the last day or two having to do with Zelensky, because when he considers Zelensky not credible, he's supposed to be making a deal with him, whether you like him or you don't like him. So I wasn't happy with that.
This comes as President Trump has been trying to negotiate with Putin behind the scenes for a ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine. At the same time, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky came out and expressed new concerns about the mineral deal that he's been discussing with President Trump. President Trump expressed concerns about that deal falling apart.
And I think Zelensky, by the way, I see he's trying to back out of the rare earth deal. And if he does that, he's got some problems, big problems.
So we'll see where that continues to go. But President Trump really taking a harsher tone with Russia will be an interesting dynamic to watch over these next few weeks. President Trump has said he will plan to talk to Putin again this week over the phone. This week is also a really important week for Senate Republicans as they prepare their budget plans for reconciliation. Now, just a very quick look at what reconciliation is. Reconciliation sounds very, very wonky, and it is. It is a tool that the House and Senate have when one party has the White House, the House, and the Senate. Reconciliation is a tool that they have to use a simple majority in the Senate, that's just 51 votes, to be able to pass very large bills that fall under the budgetary process. And so there's always a big discussion and debate about what fits under budgetary process, and they find ways to make larger issues like immigration and others have an economic impact that's tied into this bill. And so you've heard House and Senate Republicans talk about President Trump's vision for a big, beautiful bill. One of the most urgent priorities for Republicans is extending the Trump tax cuts from 2017 that are set to expire. Democrats have come out hard against extending those tax cuts, which gives Republicans the opportunity to point out the fact that Democrats are calling to raise taxes. They are talking about rising prices. They're talking about President Trump being responsible for all the ills left behind by President Biden. It will be very difficult for them to do that now that they are advocating for a tax hike on middle-class families. We all know those tax cuts impacted everybody. News coverage and studies that followed for many years showed that everyone benefited from those tax cuts up and down the economic ladder. Now we're going to see if Democrats are actually going to try and block that from happening. They are working behind the scenes with the parliamentarian, who is the sort of House and Senate, the Senate referee, to determine what fits into the reconciliation budgetary framework and what is considered not germane or something that cannot be in a reconciliation bill. What's notable is in 2021, Democrats tried to work the parliamentarian, that referee, to say that the $15 minimum wage at the federal level was something that they should be allowed to include, even though Republicans made the case that it would kill hundreds of thousands of jobs because companies would have less money to hire more people. Now, just 4 years later, they are trying to work the refs again with the parliamentarian to extend a major tax increase for middle-class families. In today's You Can't Make It Up segment, we have a few notable takes from Democrats. First, Jasmine Crockett, fresh off of attacking Texas Governor Greg Abbott for being in a wheelchair, attacked Byron Donalds for his interracial marriage.
Such as Byron Donalds, who are going to continue to say that, the fact that you sitting around talking about life was better under Jim Crow, is this because you don't understand history? Or literally it's because you married a white woman and so you think that whitewashed you? I'm not really sure.
Yikes. Enjoy dealing with that, Democrats. Our favorite, Tim Walz, also shared some very candid feedback he got from his own son about losing to President Donald Trump.
I'm the dad. In the middle of it, he gives me the old, says the guy who got his ass kicked by Donald Trump. And I'm like, okay.
Lastly, over the weekend, there was a massive day of action for the dark money protests attacking Tesla. As we've talked about before, these protests have been largely funded and coordinated by dark money groups aligned with both George Soros and the Arabella Advisors Network. But again, it is incredibly crazy to consider that just a few months after Joe Biden spent all of his political capital and hundreds of billions of our tax dollars getting people to drive electric cars, Democrats are attacking the most successful electric vehicle company in America, Tesla, both by burning them down and doing weird dances and chants outside of those offices. That is all the time we have for today on 10 Minute Drill. Thank you so much for joining us. Please subscribe on YouTube. Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, anywhere you get your podcasts. Thanks again for joining us.